Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well. Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Swamp Thing, number 125. And this is actually a 20th anniversary issue. I guess Swamp Thing began in 1973. And because of that, this is a double-sized issue, so it's going to be a little bit longer than our normal episodes. And just a little catch-up on what's been going on. In the last issue, Swamp Thing was pulled from Louisiana and teleported to a Central American nation. They don't say which one, but it looked very much like the Mayan or Aztec cultures because there was pyramids. So Swamp Thing was pulled here because the native people had been tricked by the Sunderland Corporation that told them that they should use their fertilizer and they'd never have to worry about food again. But then it turned out that after about 2 cycles of using this fertilizer, all the plants would die and the ground ended up being poisoned. And no one would listen to them, not the government, not Sunderland, not anybody. So they made a human sacrifice with the Sunderland Corporation representative and called on their god Hipehotep, who ended up being Swamp Thing, to come help them. So Swamp Thing, like I said, was pulled from Louisiana by this ceremony. He does help the people, but in the process, I believe they all get killed and the villages are burned by the government and mercenaries sent by Sunderland. So when we left the area, there was definitely like burning villages. I'm not sure if everybody died or if just some people died, but we know the people who called him definitely all died because the mercenaries mowed them down with machine guns. But at least Swamp Thing was able to restore the land and remove the poison from the soil. So if there is anybody still living there, which maybe there is, they will at least have some land to grow food on. So first things first, with issue 125, we got the cover. We see in the background Swamp Thing is being held down by some corpses, possibly zombies, as he tries to get at a very messed up looking Tefé. She is glowing blue and there's like sparks of electricity coming off of her. And her face looks very interesting. It looks similar to a face we've seen a while ago, probably before the Alan Moore run. It looks like Dr. Anton Arcane's bug face, if you remember that when he was like a spider. And even in Hell, I believe he has this kind of bug-looking face. And when I say bug, I'm talking about she's got like a big eye that kind of looks like a fly's eyes with like multiple little baby eyes inside of this one big eye. Her left eye is normal, and she has a very pulled back grimace on her mouth, like her teeth are showing and her gums, almost like her lips have been cut off or something. And also we see the name of this issue on the front of this cover, which is Possessed by Arcane. So it sounds like we have the return of Anton Arcane in some form or fashion. And we also see that this is written by Nancy Collins with art by Scott Eaton and Kim DeMulder. And as we turn to the first page, we see we are in Hell. And specifically, it says we are in the burning wastes of the 5th circle of Hell 6 months ago. And apparently the burning wastes are just a big desert where people's heads are kind of sunken into the earth or on pikes. So all these heads are calling out saying, "Someone help me, please help me. Water, water, forgive me, Lord." And then we see the person that they are begging to is the lesser demon, Anton Arcane. And the last time we saw him is when he became a lesser demon from just being a normal tortured soul in hell. That was during the Doug Wheeler run. And if you're new to the podcast and you're not fully up on the Swamp Thing lore, Anton Arcane is Abby's uncle. And in the Doug Wheeler run, when he became a lesser demon, he was able to create his own body, which kind of looks like a big, ugly spider, but it has wings, so it's also kind of like a fly body mixed with it. And those wings are made of meat, so they're really big and fat and useless. And then on top of that body, he has his normal head. And when I say normal, it's not like humanish, because even before he went to hell and died when he was on Earth, he had been doing experiments on his body, making him kind of like Frankenstein. So he has a head that's like completely bald. His face looks very like it's been cut up multiple times by surgeries. His nose is almost missing. His lips look like they've been removed, and all you can see is his gums and his teeth. And then one of his eyes, his right eye, looks like a fly's eyeball. So Anton Arcane is looking down at these heads that are in the sand, and the one that was begging for water is still begging for water, and he goes up to that one and says, "What's the matter, friend maggot?" And the man answers, "Thirsty, so thirsty. Please, I'll give you anything you want if you'll get me out of here." And Anton thinks this is hilarious, and he says, "Can you open the infernal gates? Can you free me of my servitude to Prince Beelzebub? If so, I'll gladly remove you from this place, friend maggot." Then the head he's talking to says, "Well, no." Then Anton says, "No, I didn't think you could. So I guess you'll have to stay here and take your medicine." And then he proceeds to open his mouth and vomit all types of insects like maggots and flies and other stuff like that on top of this head. But before Anton can really get into his torturing, someone says, "No, no, no. You call that torturing?" And then in the next panel, we see a pulled back shot where Anton is standing next to this giant, I'm going to call it a baboon pig hybrid because it's got tusks, but it has kind of like a baboon or an ape body. And I'm assuming this is some sort of higher demon than Anton, because it seems like he can do whatever he wants to Anton. He actually picks Anton up by the scruff of his neck, which is just made of loose, gross skin. And Anton is begging him, saying, I'm sorry if I displeased you, Lord Gorfek. I'm doing the best I can." And Gorfek holds Anton up in front of his face and says, "The trouble with you, Arcane, is that you lack real imagination. That brand of torment went out with the pitchforks and hot coals up the bum. Perhaps you'll have a better understanding of torment once I chew you up and shit you out." And then Gorfek opens his mouth to throw Anton in like he's going to eat him, and Anton is yelling, "No, not again, no!" But just as he's about to do that, another demon shows up saying, "Gorfek, have you heard the news?" So Gorfek pauses and does not eat Anton, and he asks, "News? What news?" And this demon's name is Tatterwing that Gorfek is speaking to. So Tatterwing says, "The boss has called it quits. He's closing up shop." And Gorfek asks, "Are you sure about this? It isn't another one of his stupid practical jokes?" And Tatterwing answers, "It's true. He turned the key over to one of the Endless." And Gorfek asks, "Do you know what this means?" And Tatterwing answers, "Yeah, we're out of a job." And this news seems to anger Gorfek, and he completely forgets about what he was doing with Anton, and he sets Anton down, and he follows Tatterback wherever they're going to look into this hell situation. And he yells to Tatterback, "Contact Bloodrunnel and Shakeback. Tell them to meet me at the 7th Circle. We're not going to let him get away with this." And as he runs away, we see Anton's face because he's very excited that he did not just get eaten up and shat out. And he ends up landing right next to the head he was torturing earlier. And Anton says, "Of all the luck." And the head next to him says, "I don't understand what's going on." And Anton replies, "Don't you see, maggot friend? The fallen one has abdicated. The gates have been thrown open. There is no more hell. Now is the time to flee, before the dukes and princes of hell set amongst themselves for sovereignty." And something must have changed with Anton's wings on his body, because before they were made of like meat, and they definitely wouldn't let him fly, because the last time we saw him, he was thrown out of Beelzebub's castle, which is hovering above the ground, and he did not fly with his wings, he just fell to the earth. But now, apparently, he can fly with his wings, because he spreads them, and he begins to take off and leave that head there, and he says, "Farewell, friend maggot. I am off to rejoin my loving family." And the head that he was talking to watches Anton fly away, and he says, "Wait, take me with you. Please come back." And I don't know why this head thought that Anton would save him, because he was just torturing him a second ago. So this head is left thirsty just watching Anton leave, along with his only hopes to ever get out of hell. Then we turn the page and we are back on Earth. We are inside of the Swamp Thing house, specifically in Tefé's room, and she is playing with some blocks on the floor, and the blocks are spelling out Swamp Thing. And even though on the cover it said that the issue was titled Possessed by Arcane, this has actually a different name inside that says it's called Family Reunion. So as Tefé is playing with her blocks, all of a sudden she hears a noise. It's like someone's calling to her behind her, and it's a ghostly voice saying, "Tefé, Tefé." And Tefé hears this, and she turns, and she sees a ghostly figure of Anton's face, and it's poking out between the bars of the crib, and it says, "Don't you recognize me, Tefé? I'm your Uncle Anton." And Tefé kind of turns around and looks at it, and then the figure of Anton begins to grow from more than just his head to an actual body that's all gray. It is a more humanoid body that has human shoulders and a torso and arms and hands, but the fingers of the hands extend extra long. So as Anton approaches her, she says, "Uncle Anton?" And he answers, "That's right, my sweet. Uncle Anton. We met when you were much, much younger." And then he gets closer to her and he puts his long fingers around her head. And she's looking like she's kind of scared. And Anton says, "I've missed you very much, Tefé. I've come a long, long way just to see you, to be your friend." And Tefé, like I said, is kind of scared, but she says, "Friend?" And Anton says, "Yes, friend." But before Anton can do whatever he was doing there, Lady Jane comes in and looks around for Tefé saying, "Tefé? There you are, pet. Come along. It's time for your lessons." And the second she walks in the room, it seems that the apparition that was Arcane, that was wrapping around her face with his fingers, has disappeared. And as Lady Jane picks Tefé up and begins to walk out of the room, she says, "Strange that it should be so chill in this room." Then we cut to the outside of the house where Abby is hanging up laundry. And out of nowhere, a man says to her, "And how are you doing this fine day, missy?" And she whips her head around quick to see who was talking. And it's actually a voice that we've heard before. It is the mysterious Mr. Yaya. And if you don't remember, he is from issue 111, which is called Zydeco Yaya. And he is the man that was telling Swamp Thing and Abby and Tefé the different stories about spooky things that have happened in the swamp. And we know as the reader that he is a ghost or some kind of supernatural being, but Abby does not know that. Somehow she missed the fact that he turned into a fiery apparition at the end of issue 111 and was talking to Swamp Thing. So I guess she was walking ahead and didn't see that. So when Abby realizes it's him talking, she says, "Yaya, you gave me a turn." And Yaya says, "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you." And I'll describe Yaya in case you didn't listen to the episode for issue 111. He is an older black man who walks around smoking a pipe. He's wearing a blue suit with a blue fedora, and the suit looks kind of big and baggy on him. And like we saw in issue 111, sometimes he also plays an accordion. So Abby walks up to Yaya and says, "It's been a while. Alec and Tefé will be happy to see you." And Yaya says, "I just wanted to drop by and see how y'all are getting along." So they walk over to the house, and Abby sees Swamp Thing on the porch, and she yells out, "Alec, we've got ourselves a visitor." And as they get to the porch, Abby goes inside saying, "I'll be back in a second with some lemonade." So she leaves Yaya and Swamp Thing on the porch together, and Yaya asks Swamp Thing, "Does she know?" And Swamp Thing answers, "No, I did not tell my wife of your true nature." And then we see the real version of Yaya, who's like the spirit with the accordion, and there's orange and yellow smoke burning around him, and he says, "Good. Live folks tend to act different once they know you're dead." And then he changes back into the human form, and he says, "Once more I have come to warn you of a great evil invading our swamp." And Swamp Thing asks, "Dark Conrad?" And Yaya answers, "No, although I sense it is equally malignant." And then Yaya gets all intense as he looks at Swamp Thing and says, "The ghost world is mixed up bad. The devil quit his job a while back and flung the gates of hell wide open. Things are settling down, but a few damned still run wild among the living. And this evil spirit is known to you and your family." And Swamp Thing knows exactly who it is, and he says, "Arcane." Then we cut to another area outside of the house, and we see Lady Jane is teaching Tefé another lesson about how to grow stuff. And this time, instead of flowers, it looks like they're trying to grow trees. So she says to Tefé, "Now, I want you to pay close attention to what I'm about to do." And then she stands tall and she raises her hands above her head like she's about to do a spell. And she kind of looks like Mickey Mouse when he steals the wizard's hat in Fantasia and he's putting a spell on the mops. So Lady Jane waves her hands and roots begin to form, and then a stalk begins to grow out of the ground. And as we turn the page, we see that the little stalk has turned into a fully formed small apple tree, and apples are even growing on it. And Tefé is super excited and begins to pick the apples. And Lady Jane says, "Now you try." And it's super cute as Tefé gets in a little stance and puts her hands out, kind of mocking what Lady Jane did. And then she begins to focus really hard, and the ground kind of looks like it's beginning to shake beneath her feet. And all of a sudden, there's no roots or stalk or anything that grows. An entire tree just shoots out of the ground. And this is not a specific tree necessarily. It just kind of looks like a cartoonish looking tree, and there's different color versions of apples growing on it, along with daisies, which don't really grow in trees. So it seems once again Tefé has made something, but it's not quite exactly what Lady Jane was wanting her to make. And Tefé sees it and falls down laughing and says, "Tree, make tree." And Lady Jane answers, "Yes, dear, so you did." And then Swamp Thing walks up to this lesson and says, "Lady Jane?" And Lady Jane responds, "Yes, Prime Founder." And then she leaves Tefé playing with some butterflies and she walks towards Swamp Thing. And Swamp Thing says to her, "I have just received news that an old enemy is in the air. All of us, Abby and the baby in particular, are in extreme danger." And Lady Jane asks, "Who is this enemy?" And Swamp Thing replies, "I am not certain, but I believe it is Arcane." And Lady Jane says, "The Parliament shared your memories of Arcane. He is Abigail's uncle." And they are talking in the background, and in the foreground, we see Tefé is playing with those butterflies, and she's saying, "Pretty, pretty butterflies." And now we're just focusing on Tefé playing with the butterflies, and we can hear what Lady Jane is saying to Swamp Thing as she says, "You are right, Prime Founder. Your wife and children are in grave danger." And as they're talking about how much danger Tefé and Abby might be in, Tefé kind of focuses on one specific butterfly that begins to talk to her, and it lands on her finger, and we see that it has Anton Arcane's head, and it says to her, "That's it, Tefé. Come to Uncle Anton." Then we cut away, and we don't see what happens between Tefé and Anton, and we just cut back to Swamp Thing talking to Lady Jane, and he's saying to her, "Take Tefé back to the house. I have to make a perimeter check before returning. I would appreciate it if you would not mention any of this to Abby." And Lady Jane says, "As you wish, Prime Founder." And then she walks over to Tefé, who has an interesting look on her face. It looks like she is kind of mad or annoyed. And then Lady Jane picks her up and says, "That's enough practicing for today. It's time for your nap, young lady." And as Lady Jane puts Tefé over her shoulder, we see Tefé with a very evil smile on her face. And if you didn't guess it already, Anton Arcane has taken over Tefé's body. And as Lady Jane brings Tefé to the house, we get some narration from Anton thinking inside her body. And he's thinking, "Fools, this is so easy, so incredibly easy." And we see Lady Jane walking up to Abby, and Abby says to Lady Jane, "Here, I'll take her. Come to Mama, Tefé." And then as she takes Tefé, we see the possessed baby grab at Abby's shirt and kind of pull her shirt down where she can see the tops of Abby's breasts, and she tries to feel inside her shirt, which is super creepy because that's Anton trying to cop a feel on his niece. And Abby, of course, doesn't know anything about this possession, so she just says to her baby, "Who's my little sweet patootie, And then she walks upstairs to put Tefé down for her nap. And Anton has done something like this before. If you remember back in the Alan Moore run, Anton had possessed her husband, Matt Cable, and that really traumatized Abby once she found out because she had slept with him and she had thought that Matt was turning a new leaf because Anton was playing with her and he was making her think that Matt was getting a new job and trying to get them a new life. But it ended up that Anton, of course, was just messing with her and trying to get her into a position emotionally where he could hurt her the worst. So Anton's narration continues, and it kind of explains a little bit of that history, but it says, "Once again, I've infiltrated my slut of a niece's life by using the flesh of one she loves and holds dear. First there was the husband, that pathetic drunken oaf Cable. Now I hide within the flesh of her flesh, unseen and unsuspected, like fly eggs incubating in tear ducts of a newborn child. How sharper than a serpent's tooth indeed." So going forward, I'm just going to refer to Tefé as Anton. So if I say Anton, I'm talking about Tefé's body. So once Abby leaves the room, Anton is just left in this little kid's body, and he's staring at the hands, and he's thinking, "This shell has certain limitations. However, the brat's potential is immense. Cable's psychokinetic powers were no more than cheap parlor tricks in comparison. Still, it's been so long since I've known the joys and hazards of mortal flesh. After all this time, it's like being born anew." And then Anton stands up and waves his little baby arms around, and the bars of the crib, which are made of wood, begin to spread apart and move as Anton begins to experiment with Tefé's powers. So now Anton can get out, so he jumps down from the crib and he begins to walk around her room, and he's thinking, "To think this power was being wasted on a toddler. the ability to manipulate both animals and vegetable matter in the hands of my niece's snot-nosed bastard baby. So as Anton is walking around the room, we see the little animated flowers that Tefé grew a couple issues back are scared when they see Tefé walking around, and they seem to know that something's wrong with her. And they begin to all run out of the room, and Anton sees them, and he grabs one of them, and he begins to examine it, looking at it very intently. And it seems that these flowers remind Anton of his human days when he would experiment with humans and cut them up and make them into new creatures that he called the Unmen. So he examines this flower, and the only thing the flowers can say is la la la. So as Anton looks at it, it says la 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 in a questioning manner because it's not sure about Tefé now. And Anton's narration continues, the Unmen I could create with such wild talent. Interesting, crude, but not without promise. Perhaps I've been too harsh in judging my grandniece. After all, she is an Arcane. And as he says this last part, he smiles really creepily with her baby face, and he begins to squeeze the flower, and the flower cries out, la la ee, as Anton crushes it to death. Then we get to Swamp Thing, who's doing a perimeter check of their house. And as he's doing this, he's thinking back on all the times he met Arcane. So we see a faded memory of Arcane as an old man from issue number 2 of the original volume of Swamp Thing. And then Arcane in his first rebuilt body, which I believe is from issue 10 of the first volume of Swamp Thing. And then we see him in the Alan Moore run when he returned. And Swamp Thing is thinking over all of this, so his thoughts say, Arcane is somewhere. I can sense it, just as you can sense cockroaches creeping about in the dark. But where is he hiding, and what is his twisted brain planning this time? When will I be truly free of his interference? I've killed him so many times, I've lost count, but still, he keeps coming back to haunt me, and those I hold dear. Yet, in a strange way, I owe him my happiness. If not for Arcane, I would never have met Abby, or have fathered Tefé, while at the same time, the years we spent battling one another kept me from realizing my heritage as an elemental. After what he did to Matt and Abby, I genuinely believed we would be free to spend the rest of our days free of his evil. And then Swamp Thing pauses, and as he finishes his walk, he looks at his house from a distance, and his thoughts continue. No matter what the cost, I will protect my family from that madman. Then we get to Abby and Lady Jane in the kitchen as Abby is making dinner, and she says to Lady Jane, it's almost time to eat. I guess I should go wake Tefé up and get her ready for dinner. And as Lady Jane grows some flowers for the centerpiece of the table, Lady Jane says, I'll see to it, ma'am. And then Abby kind of looks at her and smiles and says, I realize we didn't exactly strike it off at first, but I mean, you don't have to call me ma'am. And Lady Jane replies, but you are the consort to the prime founder. And are you not considered nobility in your native land? So this might be something left over from Lady Jane's history because she was originally born in the 1800s, I believe. So she probably has a strong sense of class manners that were taught to her when she was still a human. So Abby replies to her, well, yes, I am the Baroness Arcane for what that's worth. But I'm not what anyone would call a stickler for protocol. I prefer being on a first-name basis, so call me Abby, okay? And as Lady Jane walks out of the room, she says, as you wish, Abby. So as of yet, Swamp Thing has not told Abby anything about Arcane being a danger or anything. He's just been walking the perimeter after he talked to Yaya. So he comes into the house and he says, where is Lady Jane? And Abby replies, she went upstairs to get Tefé for dinner. And then Swamp Thing asks her, did she say anything to you? And Abby replies, what about? And then Swamp Thing spills the beans saying, Abby, I think you ought to sit down. It's about your uncle. And upon hearing this, Abby kind of doesn't want to hear it. And she says, what about him? He's dead. And Swamp Thing says, I'm afraid it's not as simple as that. And she gets more perturbed saying, what do you mean? Dead is dead, isn't it? He's in hell where he belongs. You said it yourself. And Swamp Thing reaches out to touch her shoulder, but she kind of blocks him with her own hand. And he says, There has been some kind of mix-up in the afterlife. Apparently, Arcane managed to escape. I have been warned that he is headed this way, if not here already. And as you can imagine, Abby is not very happy at hearing any of this, so she gets kind of mad and pushes Swamp Thing away and says, "That's great! That's bloody marvelous! Just when I was finally able to push the memory of what that sick bastard did to me out of my mind, why can't he die and leave me alone? Why?" And then Swamp Thing reaches out to comfort her and he says, "Abby." But he is cut off as Lady Jane comes into the room and she says, "Prime Founder, it's Tefé. She's gone." Then we get to Anton walking through the swamp in little Tefé's body, and he's making some observations about how Tefé and Swamp Thing see the world because he's seeing through her eyes, and he can see the way that all plant life is glowing and has an aura of its own. And he's thinking to himself, "Interesting. Although the brat isn't Holland's natural offspring, she apparently shares many of his elemental talents. So this is how Holland sees the world. Most illuminating." Then she hears a roar behind her, and I did not know that there were bears in the swamp, but apparently there are because a bear appears in the swamp behind her. And Anton turns around when he hears this noise, and the bear kind of growls at him, and then he reaches out his little baby hand to the bear, and then the bear proceeds to explode into viscera, meat, and bone. And as Anton looks at that with little baby Tefé's evil eyes, he thinks, very interesting indeed. I have work to do. I'll postpone the experimentation for later, when I have prisoners." So Anton walks over to the edge of the water, and I thought for sure like a crocodile was going to come out to bite him because it's a little baby just standing on the edge of some water. But that is not what happens. He begins to focus, and he thinks to himself, "I can hear you calling out to me, my fellow damned. Don't worry, your deliverance is finally at hand. The time has come to let the poisons in the mud hatch out." So like I said, he's at the water's edge and he is concentrating, and all of a sudden, the hand of a dead person rises from the water. And what has just happened is Anton has raised a zombie. And as the zombie rises from the water, he thinks, Rise up, precious maggots. Your sleep of the unjust is over at last." And he doesn't just raise one zombie, he raises a bunch of zombies. And each of them have their own little thought bubbles, but they're kind of repeating thoughts that are all disjointed, and they seem to be about something to do with each of their lives that is specific to them. So for instance, the first one that is raised thinks to itself, "Eyes, 33, the color of faded denim. The act of living leached the energy from them." And then the second one he raises is thinking, "The electrical outlet. Tape it shut. Keep the electric poison from leaking out. Leaking. Shut it out. Electric poison." So that's the only time I'm going to read their inner dialogue, because it pretty much just repeats all of that again and again. But with each zombie that Arcane raises, each one has its own unique inner dialogue that's repeating over and over. And I personally love the art in this book just because of the juxtaposition of Anton walking up to these zombies, but he's in a little baby. So he's reaching out his little baby hand and he's got an evil smile. And as he reaches out to the zombie's hand to take it, he actually speaks out loud in Tefé's body and he says, "Welcome back to the land of the living, my fellow undead. Follow me, my evil dead. There are others nearby who require resurrection." So Anton, in his little baby body, leads these two zombies to the cemetery in Terrebonne Parish. And I guess to the whole cemetery, he just cries out, "Patience, dear maggots. Your deliverance is at hand. Awaken, my brothers. Take the coins from your eyes and the embalmer's cotton from your mouths." And we see in the cemetery, there's a bunch of above ground graves, I guess you call them. There's like cement coffins that are above ground that the bodies of dead people were put in. And in one of them, we see the name Esau Tosin is carved in it. And if you remember, that is the name of the evil preacher that was from issue 110 that was poisoning people that were coming to his revivals. So as he is risen into his zombie form, he is thinking over and over like a Bible verse saying, "If thine eye offend thee, pluck it out." Then we cut to another part of the cemetery where another one of those above ground coffins is having its lid removed by the dead person interred in it. And we see that the person that's inside of this one is someone we've seen before also. It is Merle Layton, the man you might remember as the guide for the reporters who were trying to find Swamp Thing in the swamp, and he had a shotgun for a hand. And Anton's speaking continues as Merle is raised, saying, "Oh, hateful dead, cast off your shrouds, break free of your rigged joints, slough off the graveyard mold that coats your skin, and join me on my unholy jihad." And as all four zombies gather together in front of Anton inside of Tefé's little baby body, he looks them over and he says, "My little war party is not quite complete." And then he looks over and he sees the mausoleum, or the crypt, I guess it's called, for Matt Cable. And if you don't remember, that is Abby's first husband, who went evil eventually and also got corrupted by Anton Arcane. So seeing this, Anton knows that if he raises Matt and has his zombie body attack them, this might cause Abigail to have even more emotional trauma. But when Anton goes over to assess this Matt Cable zombie, he says, "Interesting. Not even a trace element of the former host's personality." And we see there are no thoughts inside of this Matt Cable zombie. And I believe that this is because Matt's soul went to heaven when he was making penance for everything that he'd done to Abby, and he actually pulled his own power cable cord for his machinery that was keeping him alive in the hospital so Abby wouldn't have to do it. But the body still rises even without the personality of Matt Cable in there. So with this last rising, Anton is ready to, I guess, attack Swamp Thing and his family. And as they leave the cemetery, he says, "Follow me, my fugitives, from the darkest pit. There are scores to be settled and family matters that must be attended to." Then we cut to the swamp area that surrounds Swamp Thing and Abby's house, and we see Swamp Thing, Abby, and Lady Jane are all calling out looking for Tefé. And it seems like they've been doing this for a while, and Abby's worry begins to grow in her because she stops for a second and says, "Alec, where can she be? Why doesn't she answer? What's that monster doing to her?" And Swamp Thing once again tries to come over to comfort her and says, "Abby, it's possible Tefé wandered off on her own. Perhaps Arcane has nothing to do with this." And that is not what Abby wanted to hear. She pushes him away forcefully and says, "Don't patronize me, damn you." And Swamp Thing's taken aback and he says, "Abby." And Lady Jane kind of cuts in to interrupt this argument and she says, "Perhaps we should return to the house. If Tefé should return and no one is there." And Swamp Thing says, "That is a good idea." And then all of a sudden, him and Lady Jane get a weird feeling in the air, and Swamp Thing says, "What?" And he's cut off by Lady Jane, who also says, "Prime Founder, did you feel that?" And Abby didn't feel anything, and she asks, "What's wrong?" And it seems like Swamp Thing is trying to focus on this energy in the air, and he's saying, "I'm not sure. There was a sudden and massive expenditure of elemental energy." And Abby asks, "Tefé?" And Lady Jane answers, "Perhaps." And I guess they had taken Lady Jane's advice and they were walking back to the house when this elemental energy was felt. Because as they come into a clearing and the house is revealed to them, Abby says, "Oh my God, Alec, look!" And we see the house has been transformed to look a lot like Anton Arcane's head. It actually looks a little bit like the Hall of Doom headquarters from the Justice Friends cartoon show from the 70s. And standing at the mouth of Anton Arcane's head, which is the front door, is Anton Arcane in little Tefé's body, and she says, "Welcome home." And then Arcane sees Abby, and he waves at her with Tefé's little hand, and he says, "Mommy." And when Abby sees her, she takes off running back to the house, and she yells out, "Tefé!" And Swamp Thing cries out, "Abby!" because he knows something is wrong. But Abby doesn't listen, and she just runs straight up to Tefé and grabs her into her arms, and she says, "Don't worry, precious, Mama's here." But then Anton in Tefé's body says to her, "I hope you don't mind, mother dear, but I brought some friends home for dinner." And Abby pulls her away to look at her, and she says, "Tefé?" And then we get a panel of the zombies waiting inside, and Anton continues saying, "And they're very hungry." Then Tefé's face begins to contort, and her face begins to transform and look a lot more like Anton Arcane's face. She has the fly eye now on her right eye. Her lips pull back and almost disappear, exposing the top teeth and gums of her mouth. And then she looks at Abby and says, "What's the matter, Abigail? Don't you recognize your own flesh and blood?" And Abby grabs Tefé's body by the shoulders and says, "No, please, no." But Anton in Tefé's body jumps free of her and says, "Yes." And then Swamp Thing bursts in and he runs in between Abby and Tefé and he says, "Arcane, face me if you must, but leave my family out of this." And as he says this, the zombies begin to attack. And Arcane says to Swamp Thing, "But this is a family matter, Holland. How can my niece and grandniece not be involved?" And the first zombie body to grab Abigail is actually Matt. And when Abigail sees him, she recognizes it and says, "Matt?" Then we get a couple panels of some fighting where Swamp Thing is punching some zombies. We see Lady Jane is using her elemental powers to grow vines that tear zombies apart. Then we see Anton and baby Tefé's body floating above this whole scene, and she's saying, "It's useless, Holland. My minions are immune to whatever punishment you met out to them. After all, you can't kill the dead." And I don't know if Swamp Thing and Lady Jane are still fighting the zombies, but somehow Abigail is being held by two zombies on either side of her, and Anton is floating in front of her, and she says, "Give me back my baby, you evil old man." And Anton says, "My dear Abigail, you look more and more like your mother every year. Do you remember her?" And then he flies closer to Abigail and he begins to try to rub her cheek with his little baby hand. And Abby tries to pull away, but like I said, she's being held by the zombies. Then we cut to a flashback of a woman burning at the stake, and Arcane is speaking over this saying, "My beautiful, bewitching Anais. By all rights, she should have been mine, but she chose your father instead of me." So I guess Abby's mom got burned at the stake for being a witch, I'm assuming? So Anton continues, "Now I have a new life, a new body, and the power to rectify all the wrongs done me." And by wrongs right here, he's talking about Abigail's mom rejecting him and marrying Anton's brother instead. And this is possibly the creepiest drawing I've ever seen in a comic, but as Anton talks about the wrongs done to him and he's referring to Abby's mom, he kisses Abby with a full-on open mouth. So this panel is of little baby Tefé French kissing her mom, which is super awkward and weird. And Abby, of course, is disgusted, so she slaps Anton's face. Oh, and I didn't notice in the art, but I guess when the zombies began attacking and there was that fighting going on a page ago, Tefé's face went back to looking normal again. So Arcane rubs his cheek where he just got slapped, and he says, "You shouldn't have done that." And then he yells an order to the Father Tosin zombie, and he says, "Hurt her." And the Father Tosin zombie obeys Anton, so he stands in front of Abby, and he begins to point his finger at her, and it's getting closer and closer to her eyeball. And just before his gross, dead nails touch her eyeball, someone yells, "Stop!" And as Arcane turns around, he sees Yaya standing there saying, "Stop this madness." And then Arcane, I guess because he's mad, changes his face again to look all evil where the lips are pulled back and he's got a fly eyeball. And he says to Yaya, "Who are you to tell Arcane what to do, you wretched old minstrel?" And just as Arcane asks this, Yaya, who looked like his normal human form, transforms to his supernatural form, which is a fiery ghost, and he moves towards Arcane saying, "I serve the righteous dead. I command you to leave the child's body." And then it seems like Yaya is able to pull the spirit of Arcane out of Tefé so that they can fight, and he says, "Surrender the child." And Arcane is yelling, "Never!" But then we see, because the spirit of Arcane has been pulled out, Tefé is falling from the sky, the actual Tefé, and she's saying, "Mama." And I guess also because Yaya and Anton are fighting and Anton can't focus on the zombies stop fighting and they begin to fall back to the ground. And as Abby and Swamp Thing are watching the fight happen between Arcane and Yaya, it seems for a second that Yaya's in trouble because Arcane has him by the neck, and Abby yells out, "Alec, do something!" And Swamp Thing says to her, "I don't dare interfere while Yaya and Arcane are engaged in combat. The shock to Tefé's system could prove fatal." And just as he says that, the tables turn and Yaya now has Arcane by the neck and he's saying, "Leave the girl child in peace and return whence you came." And Arcane is yelling, I'll never go back, never! But then Yaya puts his hands on Arcane's chest, and he seems to be doing some sort of magic, and he says, do as I say or I'll burn your soul to a blackened cinder. And Arcane yells out in pain, but then he turns the tables again and says, I am Arcane, and I do as I please. Then we see the end of the battle, and all that's left is Yaya is passed out on the ground in his human form. Then we see Tefé on the ground, but as she turns to Swamp Thing and Abby, she says, I won. I won. And her face transforms from regular baby Tefé to evil Arcane Tefé. So Yaya has definitely lost, and Swamp Thing pleads with Arcane saying, if you must have a body, Arcane, take mine. And Abby is pulling on Swamp Thing saying, Alec, don't. And it seems like since Arcane has won, he is making more and more changes to Tefé's body. It seems like her teeth begin to get sharp and her toes begin to grow claws as she jumps onto a tree branch above them and walking upside down underneath it. And he says to Swamp Thing's offer, how predictably noble of you, Holland, but why should I want a misshapen, mossy carcass when you and my niece were thoughtful enough to produce a far more intriguing and powerful host for me to inhabit? By accelerating the brat's cellular growth and reconstructing her chromosome structure from XX to XY, I'll be an adult male again in no time, and... But then Anton cuts himself off because something is happening, some people have come, and we don't see them yet, but Anton says, no, not them. And then flies start to surround his body, and he begins trying to step on them, saying, no, why does something always come along and spoil things for me? Why? And then Arcane's spirit begins to be pulled out of Tefé's body, and as his spirit comes out, it says, very well, you can have your precious brat, Holland, but don't think you've seen the last of me. And as of yet, we still have no idea why he got pulled out of Tefé's body. But Tefé lands on the ground and she begins to cry, and Abby goes over to her and picks her up saying, there, the nasty man's gone away. And then Lady Jane, who is kind of like us, she's confused about what happened, asks Swamp Thing, I don't understand. What was he so afraid of? And Swamp Thing answers, I'm not sure, but I think we're soon to find out. And then above them, someone says, where is he? And we see floating above them are the two demons, Agony and Ecstasy. And I believe we've seen them before in Swamp Thing, but they originally appeared in Hellblazer. And I'll describe them for you. They are a naked man and woman that are tied together with barbed wire. The man is holding on to the woman's body. And as they talk, and depending on who's talking, they will switch positions where if the woman's talking, the man will be bound to her. And if the man is talking, the woman will shift and be bound to him. And their bodies have no color on them at all. They are pure stark white. So at the moment, the female demon is talking and she says, where is the demon who calls himself Arcane? And Swamp Thing answers, whoever you are, you're too late. Arcane has left already. And the female demon answers, interesting. We did not know the Earl Kings and Wood Witches still presided over this dimension. In deference to your stations, we shall answer your question. We are Agony and Ecstasy, bounty hunters elite for the Archdukes of the Infernal Circle. It is our task to return the errant damned to their proper stations in hell. We seek the minor demon known as Arcane. You say he's no longer here, yet his stink clings to this mortal she-child. And then we get a zoomed-in panel of Tefé, and she is crying. She looks very traumatized by this whole experience, and she is sucking her thumb in her mom's arms. And the female demon continues, this bears closer scrutiny. Perhaps during vivisection, the broodling will reveal where Arcane has gone to. And Swamp Thing angrily cuts in at this and says, that broodling is my daughter, and if you take her, you will have to go through me first. And then it seems like while Swamp Thing was saying this, the demons changed place, and the man is now talking, saying, do not threaten us, friend Bogatir. We only do our job, and hell cannot be denied its due. And then another voice speaks, and it's someone off panel saying, beware, hunters. The last thing your employers desire is a full-scale war with the elemental kingdom. and the Earl Kings wield influence even in realms beyond yours. And we see that the man who has appeared is the Phantom Stranger, and he has appeared before in the series, but usually in Volume 1, I believe. And the only time we saw him in Volume 2 was usually in the Alan Moore run when something bad was going on and they needed all the supernatural people together. So you'd have like Deadman and the Phantom Stranger and Etrigan the Demon. And that was when they were all fighting back the darkness during the Crisis on Infinite Earths event. So the demon sees him and answers, "We leave, stranger, but do not think we shall forget or forgive this slight." So Agony and Ecstasy disappear, and the Phantom Stranger walks over to Tefé, who still looks pretty traumatized. She is looking at him, but she is still sucking her thumb. And the Phantom Stranger says, "So this is the new elemental I've heard of." And then Swamp Thing comes over to shake his hand, saying, "Thank you for diffusing an ugly situation." And the Phantom Stranger says, "No thanks are necessary. It is my nature to be drawn to such matters, and I owed Yaya a debt from some time ago." And at the mention of Yaya, Abigail yells, "Yaya, we forgot all about him. Is he?" But then Yaya cuts her off as he gets up off the ground and he says, "Dead? To tell you all the truth, yes, I am. But that don't slow me down none." And the Phantom Stranger goes over to him and says, "Hello, old friend." And Yaya says, "Howdy." Then Abby looks over and sees their house still looks like the head of Arcane, and she says, "Oh, Alec, look at our house." And Swamp Thing replies, "It's nothing that cannot be fixed." And then Lady Jane asks, "Prime Founder, what of Arcane?" And Swamp Thing answers, "He will be back. Of this I have no doubt. And next time, I'll send him back to the hell he so richly deserves." Then we get an epilogue and we cut to a cryo storage facility that has a lot of markings from Sunderland Corporation on the machinery. And we see one of the cryo units is being moved, and the guy moving it says to the guard, "Hey, O'Malley, got you another popsicle. You want to sign for this one?" And as the guard looks at the shipping and receiving papers, he says, "Huh, this one's been shipped from the West Coast branch. Wonder who it is." And the deliverer says, "Beats me. Maybe it's Uncle Walt." Of course, meaning Walt Disney. So the guard takes a closer look at the cryo unit, and there's some frost on the glass, so he kind of wipes it away. And as he sees who's inside, he says, "Well, I'll be a blue-arsed baboon." And the delivery guy asks, "You know this guy?" And the delivery guy answers, "Know him? That's old man Sunderland himself." And we get the reveal of Sunderland's face in the glass. And this is the first time we've seen him since Swamp Thing killed him in the second issue of the Alan Moore run. And this is a new revelation of information because no one knew that he was cryogenically frozen after that. And as we see him in the glass, we also see the face of Anton Arcane appear in the glass, and it seems like he is now going to possess the body of Sunderland, and he thinks to himself, "Tasty, how very tasty indeed." And that, my friends, is the end of the issue, and I apologize if my voices got a little bit shaky at the end there. This one had a lot of demons, and that tends to wear my vocal cords out, so please forgive any inconsistencies in the character voices towards the end. And with that cliffhanger, I'm very excited to see what's going to happen in the next issue. So until then, if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains.and-comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com. And remember to always stay swampy.